I have to confess something. Out of all my videos, Birmingham has proven to be the most challenging one so far. It's such a unique city, not necessarily designed for outsiders like myself, that despite its size, and mind you it's the second largest city in Britain after London, it's quite tricky to capture its essence in words. Before this visit, I thought I had a decent understanding of Britain, and I had actually been to Birmingham once before, although it was for a completely different reason and I barely had a chance to explore the city. All I knew back then was that it had canals, a reputable university, and one of the strongest accents in the country. However, I acknowledge that this might just be my personal challenge, and I'm sure you're well acquainted with Birmingham. So let's try something. While I show the titles, why don't you share what comes to your mind when you think of Birmingham? It could be events, people, interesting facts, anything that you believe defines the city and makes it unique. Later on, we can compare our perspectives. Let's be fair, the city of Birmingham isn't exactly your typical tourist destination. Maybe that's why I had such limited knowledge about it before this trip. My understanding of Birmingham's architecture was practically non-existent, and when it comes to notable individuals, the only name that comes into my head is Tony Miles, although I highly doubt that many people are even familiar with him. Maybe someone would recall Chamberlain, and tech enthusiasts might know something about James Watt. If you have a sweet tooth, you might associate the Cadbury family with Birmingham, while music lovers would undoubtedly think of Ozzy Osbourne, Duran Duran and Black Sabbath. And let's not forget Richard Hammond, who car enthusiasts will likely remember, and of course the great Alec Asigonis, honoured by the fans of British automobiles. But truth be told, I had to start everything from the scratch. Little did I know, Birmingham actually is a significant symbol of the British Empire and its industrial might. It's a city of factories, industry and production, qualities that don't necessarily enhance its appeal as a tourist hotspot. Let's be frank, the city centre of Birmingham is just one gigantic shopping mall. It's so massive that it can accommodate 2 railway stations, with New Street being the largest station outside of London in terms of passenger traffic. On top of that, there's an insane number of shops that, personally speaking, didn't really capture my interest. The only amusing thing I stumbled upon was the so-called Karen's Cafe, a place where they intentionally offer service with a touch of rudeness and boorishness. Other than that, it's your typical enormous shopping center, only on a mind-boggling scale. Perhaps there's a reason for this unique layout. During the Second World War, Birmingham, being an industrial hub, suffered severe damage from bombings and was partially left in ruins. As a result, the restored city doesn't give off a cohesive impression. It's more like a patchwork of different architectural styles. Right in the heart of the city, you might find some relatively old buildings standing alongside modern glass and concrete structures. But I am actually more accustomed to the European tradition, where historical city centers are meticulously restored even after great destruction, creating a seamless experience as you wander through space and time. But then again, maybe this is just Birmingham's normal state. Take this building, for example. Anywhere else, I would label it as the City Hall. But in Birmingham, the Town Hall is not an administrative building at all. In fact, it was originally constructed in 1834 specifically as a concert and exhibition hall, resembling the Roman temple of Castor and Pollux. Architecturally, it has no connection whatsoever with the actual City Hall located on the same square. And once again, the strikingly modern building standing behind the Gothic-looking Chamberlain fountain seems to defy the surrounding structures. Now, when it came to filming, it actually wasn't the most convenient experience. The city center is currently undergoing extensive renovation, and some shots had to be taken through fences, quite literally. Despite all that, Birmingham remains a quintessential English city, with occasional glimpses of unconventional architectural elements here and there. The earliest mention of a settlement in this area dates back to the 6th or 7th century, although there are artifacts and stone tools that suggest even older human presence. Legend has it that the Bermutride once inhabited the crossing where a bridge stands today, over a rather small river. It feels more like a legend than the actual historical beginning of the city, to be honest. However, Birmingham's real growth began in the 12th century, when it emerged as a jewelry center and producer of metal goods. Later on, it became a significant hub for small arms manufacturing. With such a legacy, it's not surprising that the city gained a reputation for crime, with the infamous Peaky Blinders gang being known to many. In the early 1980s, the city council even had to remove thick trees from the streets and replace them with younger and thinner ones to prevent burglars from hiding behind them. Despite its not-so-hospitable appearance, I found it relatively safe to walk around the city, even at midnight. You'll notice some massive barriers in the pedestrian squares, apparently designed to prevent cars from entering crowded areas. The squares also feature a lot of modern art, from posters and graphics to touching memorials like this one dedicated to AIDS victims. Near the library you'll find a lot more familiar monuments, but we'll get back to those later. Then we come to historical landmarks of Birmingham. Well, historical here refers to the 18th century. Take for instance the Cathedral of St. Philip. It's not just a church, it's a cathedral where the Bishop of Birmingham holds services, despite its relatively modest size. It is one of the smallest cathedrals in England, which the Broomies are really proud of. And the reason for being so small is that it wasn't originally built as a cathedral, but rather as a regular parish church. According to legend, it stands on ground that reaches the same height as the cross on St. Paul's Cathedral in London, although the actual cross seems to be lower. The Cathedral of St. Philip is also the oldest building in the city, still used for its intended purpose. Some say there's a historical coffin maker's workshop near the canals, but we'll leave that aside for now. In front of the cathedral, as expected, you'll find a cemetery. However, there doesn't seem to be much reverence for the old tombstones among the locals. Well, I guess the departed souls aren't too concerned about it either. Inside the cathedral, you'll be captivated by the stained glass windows created by the pre-Raphaelite artist Edward Burne-Jones, who was born in Birmingham and baptized in this cathedral. These windows are unique artwork painted on small pieces of glass, and the music on the background is live. That's exactly how the cathedral showed itself to me. And trust me, you can't even imagine the impact this blend of visual and auditory artistry makes in reality. One interesting thing about the cathedral is that it operates as a regular commercial business. You can officially rent it for events or concerts without any secret arrangements or complicated schemes. The prices are quite reasonable at just under £300 per hour. Sounds like an advertising, although it's not. Now let's conclude the religious part of Birmingham, which might not be of great interest to everyone, including myself. I want to show you the second and the final church I visited. It's not very ancient as it was built in the mid-19th century, but it still has a modern feel to it considering it's made of beloved English brick. This is the neo-Gothic church of St. Chad, named after a bishop from the 7th century who spread religion around here in Mercia. He received his education in the legendary Lindisfarne and was believed to be one of the earliest Christians in England according to another legend. The church is simpler compared to the Cathedral of St. Philip, but it has an intriguing story associated with it. During the Second World War, when the Nazis were bombing British industrial zones including Birmingham, a German incendiary bomb struck the church during an air raid in 1940. The bomb broke through the roof, fell to the floor, and then miraculously jumped before finally exploding. It happened to bang right next to the church's heating pipes, which burst and extinguished the fire. Whether it was a divine intervention, a stroke of luck, or a flaw in the bomb's design, I can't say for sure. But the fact remains, the church stands strong and intact to this day. This is now about all for the churches. I'm kind of sorry to have so many of them, but they still are the oldest buildings in the city, so I could not completely leave them aside. But I'm now finally ready to explore the famous Birmingham Canals. They represent another touch of the industrial past of the city. The canals were originally built simply as a transport waterway, connecting Birmingham, Wolverhampton and the industrial areas to the west. Think of them as of a hard-working horse, purely about utility rather than any romance. The canals are actually quite narrow and feature numerous locks operated manually, which altogether gives them a somewhat toy-like appearance. Nowadays, the canals are no longer used for transporting any goods, and although there are occasional tourist boats, I did not come across any during my visit. And I must admit, the canals look rather dirty and I wouldn't personally fancy a boat ride there. However, strolling alongside them for a brief 15 or 20 minutes within the city is probably worth it. But to catch a charming view of the canals, you need to head beyond the city borders. That's how they appear in Birmingham suburbs. Near the Cathedral of St. Chad, the canals are actually even blocked, preventing both land and water passage and unfortunately serving as a residence for local homeless chaps. To be honest, it's nothing like Venice or Amsterdam here. However, since you are already in Birmingham, I must admit it's still quite an unusual sight to see canals in the midst of a bustling city. One of the modern highlights of the city is the new library building, which boasts a remarkable level of functionality and surprising comfort. I'll take you inside in a bit to show you what surprised me there, but for now, let me show you the square where the library stands, further exemplifying the mix of styles and eras in Birmingham. On one side, you'll find modern bank buildings, while on the other side there's a monument to King Edward VII. A symphony hall stands nearby, opposed by a memorial to those who lost their lives in the First World War. Close to the King Edward monument, you'll discover the former site of John Baskerville's house. This John Baskerville isn't the one invented by Conan Doyle. Seems there were no Johns other than Watson there, but a real printer, engraver and typographer. His fonts would later be acquired by Beaumarchais and used to print 70 volumes of Voltaire's works. On the same square, there's a somewhat excessively golden monument to the great trinity of engineers and inventors, William Murdoch, Matthew Boulton and James Watt. You should be familiar with the last one, since the unit of measurement of power is named after him. He was the first person in the world after whom the unit of measurement of a physical quantity was named at all. A bit further ahead, you'll come across a rather peculiar monument known as the Real Birmingham Family. It portrays two real sisters from Birmingham, Roma and Emma Jones with their sons. Sculptures like this are often open to interpretation, and everyone sees something different in them. As for me, it symbolizes a call to responsibility, as both sisters are single mothers, and the monument is not called a proper family. On this slightly somber note, let's turn our attention to the library. It's the largest library and cultural center in both Great Britain and Europe, and the scale of it is truly impressive. Inside, it manages to be spacious without being empty, cozy without being cramped, and illuminated without being overly bright. I have a deep admiration for paper books, and I was genuinely thrilled by the sheer number of them in the library. And what's remarkable is that you don't need anything special at all to enter. They didn't ask me for a library card, a passport, or even a deposit. I remember clearly that I filmed the magnificent beauty of the library, but unfortunately technical issues disrupted my recordings. However, I do have a couple of photos from other people to share with you. Let me tell you about the beautiful hall filled with maps. It's truly impressive, and if I had time, I'd probably stay there longer. Notably, there are a couple of panoramic views closer to the roof. Personally, I'm not a big fan of such viewpoints, which might well explain why they didn't leave a strong impression on me. Also, Birmingham doesn't really have any standout attractions for such views. But, well, as long as I'm here, here's the square in front of the library, which I showed you earlier. On one of the library levels, there's a so-called secret garden, as it's aptly called. It features several flower beds, nothing too extraordinary except for the fact that it's situated on the rooftop. But again, maybe I visited it at the wrong time and missed its full bloom. On the top floor, you'll find a Shakespeare Memorial Hall. Birmingham is home to one of the two most significant collections of Shakespeare's works. The hall I'm standing in was initially created for the city's very first library in 1882. After its demolition, it was carefully dismantled and preserved, eventually finding a new cylindrically shaped hall designed specifically for its display on the roof of the modern library. That's pretty much it for exploring the city itself. And now I'm heading towards a place in Birmingham that took me by surprise. Let's keep the intrigue for a moment, as I still need to walk past the classic and charming English houses to reach it. Personally, I have a deep fondness for them. Among all the Harry Potter movies, my favorite is the very first one. It might be the least magical, but it feels the most English to me. In the meantime, let me share a bit about British license plates. It can be a bit confusing, especially now, after the UK's departure from the EU. Firstly, the plates are multicolored, white for the front plates and yellow for the back. I haven't seen this anywhere else. And that's just for standard plates. You can also personalize them with your own combination of letters. Speaking of standard plates, some owners choose to add a vertical stripe on the left-hand side. Usually it's blue, but for electric cars, it's obviously green. Blue isn't straightforward either. Before joining the EU, everything seemed clear. And then, whoops, the flag was the same for everyone. But there's always a way around it, resulting in something like this. And then, whoops again, Britain went its own way. No time for flags, although I did come across Union Jack stickers. However, there's just one vehicle that remains unaffected by all this fuss. Yes, that's right. The official car of the monarch is the only car in the UK that has no license plates at all. Now I'm almost at my destination. From here, and without any explanation, it might not look very impressive. It's actually one of the two surviving working mills with a mill pond. Welcome to the Sarhole mill. Interestingly, it was used by the renowned Matthew Boulton, who was James Watt's partner and whom I mentioned earlier when talking about the library. A steam engine was installed at this mill, which explains the need for a large chimney. However, the most significant aspect of the mill is not related to machinery. This mill could be seen from a window of a boy named John, who lived here from the age of 4 to 8 at the end of 19th century. At that time, it was just an ordinary village mill where 2 millers worked. There was a pond with swans, a flowery hollow, and village houses in the distance. A paradise for a child. As he grew up, he became a philologist and went on to write one of the most famous books in modern English history. He even transported the essence of the mill from his childhood into his literary world, as he confirmed that the mill in Hobbiton was inspired by the mill in Birmingham that he knew. We don't know exactly how the millers themselves treated the young John Tolkien. Reflecting on my own childhood, I doubt they held him in high admiration, so it's quite possible that he occasionally managed to slip away from them to save himself from trouble somewhere here. Despite everything, the old mill remained beloved and enchantingly magical in his memory. There are numerous references to this place in Hobbiton. For example, the favorite tree that young John loved to climb is also present in The Lord of the Rings. It's the festive tree in the Shire. Just like the real tree, the one in the book was eventually cut down. And it's said that John himself was deeply saddened by the loss of his beloved tree, just like Sam was in the book. Speaking of Sam, he also hails from Birmingham. His full name is Samwise or Sam Gamgee, and there was indeed a real person named Samson Gamgee who lived in Birmingham. He was a renowned surgeon who works in a local hospital and is significant for inventing, among other things, an absorbing cotton material, still known locally as Gamgee. This adds another layer of fascination to Sam's story in the book, as you may recall the name of his wife, Rosie Cotton. According to another legend, after the release of The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien received a letter signed by As Gamgee, supposedly from Samson himself. A dumbfounded Tolkien sent him a signed copy of the book and confessed that he feared receiving a letter signed by As Gollum. However, this is purely a legend. The surgeon Gamgee did exist, and Tolkien likely knew about him, but he couldn't have read about himself or written to the author of The Lord of the Rings. The real Sam Gamgee had passed away 6 years before Tolkien was even born. Even the 2 famous towers in the book could have been inspired locally, although that's just one possibility among many. Parrots Folly and Edgbaston Pumping Towers have always managed to capture the attention of boys throughout the ages. The mill has now undergone several restorations and currently operates as a museum. You can easily take a tour to explore the mill inside, but much of the surrounding area is open to the public without even needing a ticket. It's definitely worth a visit if you're a fan of Tolkien or simply want to admire the beauty of a preserved piece of English countryside. And in true British tradition, you can always enjoy a cup of tea in the cafe while sitting at tables that resemble giant fish eggs here. Finally, there are a few more places in Birmingham that I did not visit this time. One place that's definitely worth a visit is the National Motorcycle Museum. The only trouble is that it's quite inconvenient to reach by public transport, and I didn't have a car this time. Another place is the so-called back-to-backs, which are restored residential buildings typical of workers' homes. However, I'm not sure how exciting it would be. You can also explore the City Museum, but again, I don't know much about its collection. After visiting the Rijksmuseum and the Prado, as I mentioned in the Madrid video, I'm not sure if it's a must-visit. Yet the docks where the Peaky Blinders were filmed would definitely be interesting to see. I actually have a colleague who lives nearby and who promised to show me around, but he's also a big connoisseur of local pubs, so yes, there are some serious doubts whether we can actually stay on track. All in all, I can't say that it's worth specifically planning a trip to Birmingham. Maybe not for cultural experiences or highly historic sites, but on the other hand, I really enjoyed the library. Fans of Tolkien will surely love the windmill, and technology enthusiasts will appreciate the motorcycle museum. As always, the decision is yours, and as for me, I'll continue searching for other interesting places. See you there!